What's going on, guys and gals, and welcome back to the channel. If there's one thing I've learned about PC building is that there's this constant itch to update and tweak the build. Well, today is the start of me scratching a very large itch. You'll see what I mean. When building my gaming PC in the Fantex Evolve X, I came to the realization that there were limitations I hadn't anticipated. I couldn't do a separate pump and reservoir like I wanted to. And while I really like the build and the case, I felt like I ended up limiting the build in some ways because of changes I had to make due to those space limitations. Those limitations are about to be remedied. This is how we're going to remedy them. So when I first saw Phanteks unveil the Enthoo Luxe 2 at CES in January, I was impressed with what Fantex was doing. I thought it was more appropriate for what I wanted to do, and it just seemed like the case that if I would have waited a few months more would have been perfect. In reality, it didn't even launch in the United States officially on Newegg until like maybe a month ago. It was originally supposed to launch in August, and it didn't actually launch in August, which is a whole nother set of issues, which I'll get to here in a moment. My thoughts on this being a great case were more or less confirmed when at Computex in May, the final design was shown. Now, they had made some tweaks. They had changed a few things about what the case was going to be. In fact, there was a mesh fabric that was originally part of the case that they ended up removing. And it was going to come in at $189, which is actually $10 less than what the Evolve X comes in at, which was astounding. Now, there's a reason it's that much cheap. It's cheaper than the Evolve X, and the primary reason, of course, is fans. The Evolve X comes with a couple of fans. This case doesn't come with any, and I'll get to that here when I'm actually looking through the actual case. It really had all the makings of my dream scenario. Then the case launched, except there was no product to be found. Newegg didn't have it listed, and Fantex didn't have any info to offer other than it was still coming soon despite being past the launch date. I began considering other options at this point just because of how frustrating it was trying to get info on the availability of it. Meanwhile, Lee released the expanded version of the PC11 Dynamic XL, and I really liked that case, and I thought about it for a moment. But it had its own limitations. If I wanted to reuse the parts that were in my current build, I wouldn't be able to do it because the Lee case doesn't support 140 mil variant radiators. So I would have had to get another radiator anyway. But I did like how they handled drive storage. They had dedicated drive bays in the back concealed where you couldn't see them, and they were hot swappable. So you could just pull a drive out, put it back in, and if you had a large number of hard drives you needed to work with, it was going to be pretty easy to do. But as far as it goes, it's a great showpiece case and definitely something that had my attention. I also briefly considered the Thermaltake, I'm looking to see the name of it, I can't keep this one straight. Thermaltake Level HT20, or 20 HT I should say, which is basically a shorter version of the Tower 900 with some updated compatibility. I was intrigued by that as well, but ultimately there were some things about it that just didn't sit with me, it didn't pull me enough to convince me, and the width of it was so that I would probably have had to reimagine a lot of my desk. It's much wider. It probably would have come out to about right here and would have made things real interesting. So I ultimately decided not to go with that. This is the Enthoo Luxe 2, well, what was known as the Enthoo Luxe 2. It has now been rebranded as the Enthoo 719 as Thermaltake threw a little hissy fit over the naming of the case. It is here. We're going to pull this out. We're going to take a quick look at it. Now, to be clear, I didn't need to make a change to this build. Again, I like the Evolve X. I like the build in it. I think it looks pretty good. But ultimately, I decided I needed to do it. Now, to be fair, I could have, let me get this out now. This is one thing Fantex does exceptionally well. This is their accessory kit. They do such a good job with this. Really, the case that needs to be changed is my secondary system, which is in the Phanteks Enthoo Evolve ATX TG. That one is dated. And if you remember my EK Fluid gaming kit video I did a while back, one of the big problems I ended up running into was I had to remove the hard drive bracket in the bottom. This means that the mechanical drive and the SSD are just kind of hanging out down there. This isn't a big deal for the SSD, and it's really not for the mechanical drive as it's not used a whole lot. In the long run, that's not the most ideal situation. So I could have just replaced that case, with maybe a Meshify S2, but then I realized I have to drain this system anyway. It's time for maintenance. The loop has been running for a year, and it just, oh, thanks Discord. And it was time to do something about it. It was a perfect time. Would you like to go? And then what I'll end up doing is I'll take this case and move the secondary system, the 5820K build, into the Evolve X, and that will solve the hard drive thing. Let's get this. Box is huge. Oh, the bottom's partially open. Grab a flap at the bottom and pull up. Lift. Child with the assist here, which could violate YouTube's child thing now. So I figured since I have to redo everything, might as well just go for all the glory. So let's get this thing out and get a look at it. First, throw them in the box.
Ow! That hit me.
All right. Let's see if we can get this thing oh my gosh, this thing is massive. So the most obvious thing about this case is that it's big. It's taller than the Evolve X. It's not much wider, if it's any wider at all, but it is a bit taller. Now Fantex does a great job, as I mentioned, with the accessory case. Comes with the instruction booklet. This is the bracket for the secondary system, and then there are 4 hard drive caddies that are included inside of this box. Now, a nice thing about Fantex is their instruction manual is always really well done. It's very clearly labeled and organized, and it's just really nice. And one of these should have, yeah, the accessory box. And again, they do such a good job with this. Everything in a container that's closed and easy to get to. So this is one thing Fantex continues to do really, really well. Getting the panels off is pretty straightforward. The top panel is held on by 2 screws right here. Loosen these guys up, slides, lifts. There is a dust filter up top, but it does slot in. There's little notches here. You just slot it, drop it, holds in place. But it is a pretty fine mesh filter, which is pretty nice. We're gonna leave it in for now. I'm not gonna use it when I actually do the build because this is gonna be an exhaust, but it's nice to know that it's there. Front lifts, pulls out. Also a dust filter that is right in the front. Again, another one that's very fine. This is a lot like the Evolve X and just holds in place with a magnet. Side panel is like the Evolve X as well. There is a thumb screw that is, holy moly, is that on there tight. There we go. Ooh, this thing is really in there. There we go. Now we're loose. And once that is removed, the door, much like with the Evolve X, just swings open. And let's see how much, if this is any easier. That one's much easier to slide off. The Evolve X one, especially the second one, sticks. And there is a look at the front of the case. The front I/O, much like on the Evolve X and the Enthoo Evolve ATX, is pretty well hidden and just behind a pop-up. And then we get a pretty good look at the I/O here. So we've got 4 USB 3.0, we have 1 USB Type-C, we have your microphone, we have your headphone, we have the 2 RGB controls. One of these is for mode, one of these is for color, and then we have a reset with an actual hard drive activity light. This is something that hasn't been on the last couple of cases. It's not on right now, but it will be later. I'll try to get some footage of it in action, but there is an LED strip that runs from the top all the way to the back and then along the bottom as well. That's something that Fantex has really been doing pretty good with in their cases, is their RGB lighting. Now, despite my complaints about the digital lighting in the Halos, they do a good job. So again, this one just kind of tucks away and is hidden. Now for overall dimensions, the case is 595 millimeters tall, 570 millimeters long, and 240 millimeters wide. And it comes in 2 colors, anthracite gray, satin black. This is the satin black version. In addition to this LED strip in the front, this little guy right here also lights up, which is very similar to what they did in the Evolve X, again, right along the power supply shroud. As you can see, rubber grommets in plenty of spots. There's a lot of configurations you can do with this case, which is part of its appeal. The most obvious and touted one that they've pushed is the fact that it is capable of a dual system. So you can have your main system built up here, And then you can have a secondary system installed down here at the bottom. Now this will require their Revolt X power supply, which runs about $250, but it is something that can be done. This really has a lot of potential uses for it. If you want to use a dual system PC, you can have one system down here, another one up here. And if you're really ambitious, you can water cool both of them. There's a lot of space. We'll get into the fan radiator support here just momentarily. If you just want to do a straight overkill water-killed system, you have the ability to do that as well. There's a lot of possibilities with this. But let's get into what's really important about the inside of this case, and that is the fan and radiator support, because this is a big selling point of Fantex here, is what you can fit inside of this case. We'll start with fans, because the fans that can be supported is a little bit different than the radiators. In the top, this thing can support 3 120mm fans or 3 140mm fans. However, for radiator support, you are limited to 120mm variants. So if you have a 280, it will not fit up here. You're going to run into some clearance issues. They don't officially support 140mm variant radiators in the top. In the front, you have a ton of space. 4 120mm fans or 3 140mm fans will fit in here. And additionally, this is one of 2 spots that can house a 140mm variant radiator. So you can fit either the 480mm variant with 120mm fans or a 420mm radiator in the front. This is also, behind these covers, side intake. So these all can pop off and you can fit up to 4 120mm fans here in the side. No 140mm fans will fit here, however. Additionally, in the bottom, you can fit a 140mm fan right here, or you can fit 3 120mm fans. Radiator support is 120mm variant only, and they have to be a very slim radiator. Width-wise, you're good. But in terms of the actual length from the power supply shroud to the front panel is only 125mm, which means like the EKPE, EKCE will not fit in this spot. So if you want to use a 360, a 240, it needs to be relatively slim. So the SE will fit in here. So keep that in mind. Again, 125mm from the shroud to this front. So keep that in mind if you're doing anything there. Width-wise though, you're good. You can go pretty much as high as you want. You can do push, push, pull. There's a lot of options there in that regard. The only place it's worth noting though, the only place where there's a removable bracket is down here in the bottom. But this is the only spot with a bracket, and it just pulls out, and you can mount your fans, your radiator, and then just kind of drop it back in. And there's little brackets, there's little tabs on the side down here that latch into place, and then you just tighten it down, and there's your radiator. So there is a filter down here at the bottom. I'm assuming though it will only come out if the front panel is off, because it is clearly being blocked and I can feel it. So you'd have to have the front panel off to pull that filter out, but shouldn't be that big of a deal. These, like I said, these all kind of come off. This front panel will not, though, as far as I can tell, come off with this one attached. So you have to remove this top panel at least part of the way. Yeah. And then, yeah, right there. Bottom filter pulls out. Now you can fit 2 400mm radiators at the same time. You can put one here, you can put one here. If you need to, this side panel comes off and will show where you can squeeze fans in there. So you could theoretically have 2 480mm radiators in here in once. Now GGF Tech has an excellent guide on radiator support and how much can fit in any given time. People opening and closing my door. There's a lot of space, but not everything can be occupied at the same time, and that's something that's important to remember. So a 360 up top, a 360 at bottom, no problem. But you can't run, I believe he found is there's going to be limitations. You can't have a 360 up here, a 360 here, and then a 480 here. There's nowhere for the ports. So there are limitations on what you can do. Keep that in mind. Make sure you plan this out properly or you're going to have a bad time. Now, you may have noticed there is, as I said earlier, there are no fans in this case. That is going to be one of those things that keeps the cost down. And quite frankly, as other reviewers have pointed out, if you're using this case, you probably have your own fans that you want to use anyway. There's just really no point in them including fans that'll drive the cost up $30, $40 for you to take them out and use your own. So in this case, no fans is fine. Maybe it would have been nice to have one in the rear, but at the end of the day, someone like me who has all the fans in the world right now is not going to need the fans. They're just going to get put away anyway. Now, Fantex is using the same hard drive sleds that they used with the Evolve X, so this is pretty solid. It actually works pretty well. Now, you've got a couple of options. You could mount them here, or you have the option to mount them, let me see if I get this in right, like this. Or you can mount them in the bottom down here. So in each one of these spots here where these little covers are, you can mount two 3.5-inch drives. So you've got plenty of space along here. There's hard drive support in 12 different spots. You can also use these covers. Each side of this cover actually will hold a solid state drive. So there's little tabs here. So this is toolless. You could slot an SSD in here, or you could screw it in through these openings. So you could put 2 on each one of these. There's 4 of these. That's a lot of SSD support. So that's 8 right off the bat. And then there are 3 on the back side of this tray, right on the other side here, where you could also mount them. So lots of hard drive support in here. However, it is kind of limited on what you can do. So again, if you are running a dual system, you can't put hard drives here. If you're doing a full water-cooled system and you're putting radiators here and radiators here, you can't use this. So if you are using mechanical drives, you're going to want to keep in mind these are the only places where you can put them. So that is something that is important to understand. The SSD support though is outstanding unless you're putting a radiator here. If you're putting a radiator here, then it's not so great. Hard drive support though is still one of those areas that I think Fantex could do a little bit better. Other companies have figured out where to hide 3.5-inch options, such as in the back, like the Lee & Lee case, where it's even hot swappable, or Fractal Design has them on the back of the panels here. There are ways that they could do this. They wanted an intake option here, so that kind of removes this as a viable place. But if you're just doing a top rad and a bottom rad, you still have space here in the middle as long as you don't have a reservoir coming into play, which again, you could put a reservoir anywhere along this. There's a lot of places where you can put water cooling stuff. So that's one of the pluses here. The other thing that they've done, they continue to do, is include these. These are very solid. These are very nice. I like these mounts, and I'm glad that they've included 4 of them. This case does support vertical GPUs, but it is worth noting that it will be hanging out in the middle of nowhere. There's no support for your graphics card there. GGF shows this very clearly in his video. And the riser cable is not included. So much like anything else, the riser cable is going to cost you some extra money. Now the motherboard support is pretty significant. In fact, you can see there are standoff holes even as far over here, because this does support SSI EEB motherboards. So there's a lot of hardware support here. Just remember, these grommets are going to be covered if you do that, so you're going to have to get creative with your cable management. There's cutouts here, and there are cutouts up at the top here for cable management. It's not great along the bottom, and I think I would like to see an opening here for the GPU, but you'll have to use this instead or route them kind of funky. Now let's move on to the back side. Okay, so along to the back, where unlike previous Fantex cases that I've worked with, this is not a full tempered glass side panel. There is a tempered glass viewing area, but this is back to the old style of thumb screws, which are captive. So thank you, Fantex, for that. And it just slides out. There is some rubber material here to kind of help cushion it, but otherwise it's just a pretty basic side panel. As previously thought, there is a dust filter right here. So this dust filter is very strong, but it does just kind of pop in and tuck in under the top. So this is where the intake would be in the dust filter. And again, there's a dust filter down here. This is for the power supply, because as you may have figured by now, the power supply is vertical instead, which this is where your power supply would go, right in here. So it just slides in and then is held in place by screws. There is no bracket, so keep that in mind. Here is the cable management bracket that I was talking about. Just held in by thumb screws that are, again, tightened way too hard. Are these captive as well? Yes, they are. And so that just kind of opens up, but gotta wiggle it a little bit because it's on there pretty good. There it goes. This just slides off. So you can remove this entirely if you want. But here we go. This is what I really like that they did. This is the biggest gripe I had with the Evolve X, is that it had mounting points for SSDs and no sleds. But here on the Enthoo 719, we have 3 different sleds included. So very good job there by Fantex. I really appreciate that. Obviously double tie downs like they've had recently. So plenty of space down here. There's a lot of room to work with. So once you're done managing your cables, you just slide this thing back on, screw it back into place, and this should keep your cables from really bulging out and help you get the side panel back in. But again, plenty of tie down points for all of your cables. This is the other side of those brackets where you would put SSDs if you weren't using it for fans. And then you have mounting points for fans here to give you more air cooling options. And before we finish here, you'll see up top we have our fan splitter. And so you have 4 4-pin PWM headers and 3 3-pin DC headers, and then you have your out that you can run to the header on the motherboard that you want to use to control that. I like the location. It's up in the top of the case. Let me back this out so you can see that a little bit better. But right there at the top in a good spot right above the motherboard tray. Keep in mind though, if you have fans that are running from the bottom that you want to take to it, you might need a fan extension, as it is a long way from the bottom of this case back up to the top. This is the part where I talk about what I'm going to be doing. There's no build footage in this video. The actual rebuild is going to come here when I have the rest of my pieces. I'm still waiting for a couple of things to get here, and we're gonna add to the loop. So we're gonna keep the 360mm radiator. We're gonna put it up top. We're gonna keep the 280mm, and we're gonna put it on the side, or not the side, but in the front. The side I'm going to populate with the Antec Prism fans that I've had sitting laying around. In the bottom, we're going to add a 240mm radiator, and then that's where the pump reservoir combo is going to sit, and it's a new pump reservoir combo, the Quantum Kinetic TBE 300 digital RGB in Plexi. That's going to sit here, and that should fill up a good portion of this space. Obviously, the rest of the build will be mostly the same. And there's going to be the new neon RGB strips from Fantex as well. I know I kind of gave them a hard time about the Halos rings, but I still like their RGB products, and the LED strips have not given me any trouble since I've been using them. So I think we're going to use the neon strips only. I don't think I'm going to put the LED strips in here. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. There's plenty of decisions that still need to be made. And that's going to be what the new build will look like. So it'll look a lot like it does now, except an extra radiator, a bigger pump reservoir, and some extra fans as intake. And I think that's going to allow me to run the fans even lower and reduce the little bit of noise even more, and maybe even get some better performance. Build quality is pretty solid. With the panels off, there is some flex, but the panels aren't going to be completely off for most of it. And once they're on, this thing is a pretty solid beast. Overall, I like the design of it. I think it's going to work really well, and I look forward to doing this build, so stay tuned for that video. I'm actually going to try and do the entirety of it, from draining the loop and disassembling, to cleaning the blocks, to reassembling in the new build. But for now, that's gonna do it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments on the Enthoo 719, let me know in the comments below. Have you used this case? What's your experience in building with it? If you were considering this case but didn't get it, what was it that turned you away from it? Real curious to find out what other people think about this case. I look forward to working with it. I think it's gonna be fun. That's it though for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.